Hello again, and welcome to one more of my videos. My name is Sofia Tsurlaki, and this is the fifth video where we continue reading the book Homosexuality in Islam by Scott Kugle. We have already covered the first chapter where Kugle presents the situation of homosexual people in Muslim majority settings, which is not a good situation. Then it was the second chapter that analyzed or approached the topic of homosexuality in the Quran and whether the Quran actually condemns homosexuality. We saw Kugle's approach that no, there is nothing condemning specifically the homosexual act. There is a context and multiple elements in what the Quran mentions as the deeds of the people of Lot. Then this chapter I covered it in two videos. I went in depth in reading this chapter because, of course, it's the Quran, it's the basis, or it should be the basis. Then it was the third chapter approaching the topic through Hadith and Hadith critique. And today we will see the situation, or we will see how Kugle approaches the topic of homosexuality through Sharia, through fiqh, through Islamic law. If you haven't checked the previous videos, I strongly suggest you do, because as we move on, it is relevant because fiqh is based on Hadith and Quran. So if you don't have the background knowledge of the previous chapters, you might struggle, or you might start having questions that need answers. But these answers are in the previous videos, so I suggest you watch them. I will add the links on this video's description. From the chapter about assessing fiqh, which is the chapter 4 of the book, starts on page 128. This is a big chapter, and it has a lot of context when it comes to fiqh. So even someone who does not have the necessary foundational knowledge on fiqh can understand how fiqh works. But this is not, the context has nothing to do with, or it's minimally related to homosexuality. Therefore, I will not go into details. I will read to you the first case. Kugle presents the first known and recorded case of a person being sentenced based on Islamic law on the accusation of the deeds of the people of Lot. Okay? That most humans today, most Muslims today, Christians as well, but let's talk about our own species, when they hear the deeds of the people of Lot, directly their brain goes into homosexuality. But if you watched the videos related to the Quran, you might have started being more open into understanding the minute but very important details. So this is the topic I will cover in this video. I will read for you this first case of sentencing someone for the deeds of the people of Lot. The rest of the chapter I'm not going to read it to you because it is not directly related to homosexuality as mentioned before, and it is more about studying fiqh elements, which there's no point in this video doing it. However, it's majestic if you do consider yourself someone who doesn't have basic knowledge on fiqh and you want to have an understanding. So I will start reading from page 134, where before Kugle presents the actual case, gives us the context. Very important. Knowing the context, understanding the socio-political-religious circumstances of each case is essential. So, Qughle starts talking to us about what happened after the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him. We know that during the time of the Prophet, while the Prophet was alive, he was the one to cover many functions, one of which was to decide to punish people or not punish people. So he was the lawmaker or the one who applied legal rulings. We do know that the Prophet was assessing each situation in isolation on its own merits, and sometimes for the same thing, for the same act, he would proclaim different things for different cases. The most famous example, I have used it in other videos of mine, was whether you can kiss your spouse during Ramadan, where when an elderly or a young man approached the Prophet and said, hey, can I kiss my wife during the daylight? The Prophet was like, no, you can't. But when an elderly man approached the Prophet and asked the same question, the Prophet said, yes, you can. Why? Because of context. So we need to understand that the Prophet never applied a blanket rule for every occasion, for every person. Which I can talk more about how Islamic law is supposed to be happening and is not happening, unfortunately, today for many reasons, but not in this case, in this video. When, inshallah, when I will start, when you will start having access to the courses I'm designing, then I will have a long course about fiqh and Islamic law, and then I will give you all the necessary details. Now we go to the book. So the author, Qughle, explains that when the Prophet died, the person who took this responsibility of many other responsibilities of the Prophet, but also the responsibility of deciding on legal matters, was the Khalif, the Khalifa, okay, the Caliph. The first Caliph was Abu Bakr, who was the Prophet. He was a Sahaba. He was one of the Sahaba, and he was also the father-in-law of the Prophet. And we read from page 134. The Khalifa was a legislator by necessity through community delegation, whereas the Prophet was a legislator through charisma by divine dispensation. I hope you understand what that means. If not, leave me a comment and I will explain happily. As the first Khalifa, Abu Bakr was not easily accepted. Most Arabs in the three towns of Medina, Mecca, and Ta'if were persuaded to renew their pledge of allegiance to him. But Abu Bakr had to fight the Bedouin tribes throughout the Arabian Peninsula. Bear this in mind, it's important. What he talks here, in case you don't understand, when Muslims started becoming a power, a military power, so in the era of the Medina now, okay? And then they conquered Mecca. They returned, they didn't stay in Mecca, they returned in Medina. Medina was not the center. What happened is that tribes, because we still had the tribal system, so tribes surrounding geographically Medina and Mecca and these areas, they would pledge allegiance to the Prophet. Was this allegiance about religion? Here things start getting complicated. Allegiance to the Prophet is perceived, or it was perceived as those tribes becoming Muslims, but there wasn't much religious or spiritual or theological element. It was mostly and primarily military allegiance. That since we have an allegiance, we will not make war against the Prophet and the Muslims, and if some other tribe makes war against the Prophet and the Muslims, we will not help the other tribe. This is the very important element. Again, I cannot go into details in this video because of time economy. But it is important to remember that it had nothing to do with personal spiritual inclination. That is why usually in these cases, it was the elders or the heads of the tribe that would travel to Medina and give allegiance to the Prophet. And automatically their entire tribe, all the people in the tribe, would be considered Muslims. without being asked, without having any spiritual or theological inclination. Okay. These tribes, a minute detail that most people don't tell you is that these tribes had to pay taxes to the Muslims. So yes, they pledged allegiance to the Prophet, promising that if the Prophet goes to war, they will support him militarily, and if someone attacks the Prophet and the Muslims, they would protect them, but they also had to pay taxes. So what happened is, when the Prophet died, some of these tribes, because the allegiance was nominally in the name of the Prophet, so I pledge allegiance to you, to Prophet Muhammad, those tribes said, my allegiance, the military agreement I had, the political agreement I had, was with the political leader. Now the political leader is dead. Don't want to renew it. Some tribes did renew it in the name of Abu Bakr. So we see that even those that they remained Muslims, they had to renew their allegiance in the new political leader, or with the new political leader. Some said, no, our allegiance was with Prophet Muhammad. Prophet Muhammad is gone. Our allegiance is void now. We don't want to renew it. Bear this in mind. This is very important. I will read the details of that. Also, another thing that the chapter will, if you stay with us, you will read it. You will listen to it. There were other people at this time in Arabian Peninsula, from other tribes that I think At-Tabari was one of the tribes, that they presented themselves as prophets as well. So Prophet Muhammad was not the only one to present himself as a prophet at this time. We will see details. Stay tuned. Abu Bakr's first few years of rule were marred by civil war, the so-called Rida wars against apostasy, essentially inter-Muslim wars. Muslims were killing Muslims. To the extent, the tragedy was so big, to the extent that Muslims started dying, Sahaba, started dying in great numbers. And that was when, according to the Hadith, according to what we know, that's when the Khalifa decided, all three of them, but anyway, we know that Uthman did it eventually. The need for codification of the Quran started being very important, because those who remembered the Quran were dying in the battles. So soon enough, we wouldn't have any more people to remember the Quran. That's why the Quran had to be written down. It was in this context that the first punishment for the actions of the people of Lut, which most humans today understand as sodomy, was executed. Abu Bakr made the legal rulings out of his own sense of what was best, after consulting his close colleagues, rather than based on any explicit command on the Quran, precedent of the Prophet, or verbal teaching from the Prophet. So, very important point, in simple words, the first case in the history of Muslims of a person being punished for the acts of Lot was not based on the Quran, was not based on a previous case or a previous paradigm or example that the Prophet had executed someone else. The Prophet never executed anyone for this act. Was not even for something that the Prophet said, for a hadith that the Prophet said that this should be happening. It happened after Abu Bakr sat with Omar and Ali, and they had a meeting, and one of them, we will see who, said, you know what? That's what we should do. When Abu Bakr became the first Khilafah, many Arab tribes who had nominally pledged allegiance to the Prophet as Muslims renounced their allegiance when he died. Abu Bakr's first task, therefore, was to put down the rebellion and demand that these tribes uphold the religious and political commitment to remain Muslims. Their political rebellion against the authority of the vice-regent of the Prophet was seen as apostasy, irtidad, as addressed in the Quran in 554. Their desertion from the Muslim camp was seen as heresy in which religious and political elements were fully fused. Abu Bakr sent the heroic and hot-blooded military commander Khalid ibn al-Walid, who died in 642, to lead the Muslim army and fight against the Arab tribes of Hawazin, Banu Amir, and Banu Salim in 633, to force them into submission and demand that they fulfill their pledge, which they had freely given to the Prophet to be Muslims. Abu Bakr ruled for only 2 years. But these 2 years were crucial in stabilizing the young Islamic community. He assigned Khalid ibn al-Walid to be the military commander during several important battles in Arabia and then Iraq. Here I have also to clarify that Iraq was not an Arab area. It was the first area that was Arabized, but Iraq was largely a Persianate area. It had many different ethnicities living there, but largely Persians. During these military campaigns, he wrote back, Khalid ibn Walid, he wrote back to Abu Bakr in Medina that he had found a man in some outlying region who does the act of the tribe of Lot. Bear this in mind. In the letter, Ibn Walid, Ibn al-Walid, did not say, I found a man who had sexual relations with another man. He said, I found a man who does the act of the tribe of Lot. Pay attention to the wording. This event was discussed in chapter 3 in the previous video. You can go and watch the video if you haven't, for its relevance to critiquing hadith, as it illustrates how there were no hadith known to relate directly to the event. Here, in this chapter, we will explore the event more fully and highlighting its relevance to juridical decisions. Abu Bakr gathered his advisory council consisting of leading companions of the Prophet, such as Umar al-Khattab, Omar, the Khalifa Omar, we know him as such, the second Khalifa, Uthman ibn Affan, who was to become the third Khalifa, Uthman, who codified the Quran, as we know today, the Mus'haf, as we know today. And Ali ibn Abi Talib, who was to become the fourth Khalifa and whom the Shia regard as the first and only rightful ruler after the Prophet. These companions of the Prophet debated the issue because it appears that none of them knew of a precedent for such a phenomenon. The Prophet had left no example to follow in this case. None of them quoted any hadith transmitting the Prophet's teaching or advice. Very important elements. Very important elements in realizing at the end of the day, the way Muslims, most Muslims, not all Muslims, but the way some Muslims practice Islam today, is it according to God, is it according to Allah and according to the Prophet, or according to everyone who came after? And God knows best. In the end, Ali pronounced that this is a sin that only one community practiced, the tribe of Lot, and God did to them that you all know. I think that we should burn him with fire. In the Quran, God destroys the tribe of Lot by raining down on them burning stones. So Ali suggested that Muslims should punish the man by burning him alive. The council consented to Ali's suggestion, and Abu Bakr ordered Khalid ibn al-Walid to have the man burned. That was done. And here, I don't remember the note, so I have to go to the note. Here, Google has a note, so I will need to go and see the note. Okay, it was note number 4. Okay, yes. There are for this incident there are sources on page 293, so you can go and see the sources. Before I continue, another element. This book is brilliant in many ways. Whether you agree or you disagree with Google, irrelevant. There are so many benefits you can have by reading this book. You see how the first decisions were taken democratically, not by consulting the entire Ummah. Back then, there were 200,000 Muslims, but consulting the heads. Nobody, no caliph, no khalifa decided by their own. Just that, okay, I'm the wisest. My opinion is the best opinion, and I decide. That's not how things were happening back then. This is good to think about today's political leaders in Muslim majority states. This is a prime example of how the vice regents of the Prophet in the first generation made law by executive order. There was no judicial debate, no mention of legal reasoning by analogy, and no need to base decision about hadith of the Prophet. If you read the rest of the chapter a bit earlier than this part that I'm reading to you, and the rest of the chapter, you will see that Kugle gives us the necessary requirements that need to be met for some legal decision to be made. We see that back then none of these were met. None of this existed, to be honest with you. The development of fiqh, as well as every other type of Islamic science, tafsir, Quranic exegesis, hadith, all of these sciences or disciplines developed much later. So we have a decision about a man who did the act of Lot without following any methodology, any legal setting, no precedent from the Prophet, no hadith, no Quranic mention. Okay. Ali used analogy. What we talked today in fiqh, we call it analogy. So because this incident happened and God sent down burning stones, the best we can do is burn the man. But this is an analogy, and it was Ali's personal opinion with which everyone else in the council agreed. The Prophet's successors were making law by command based on their practical sense of what was best for the community in situations of crisis. Jurists mention this as the first actual punishment of a man for doing the acts of the tribe of Lot. It set up a precedent for execution, but also caused a controversy over the legality of burning as a punishment. The event leaves many questions open. Questions that the jurists ignored. If this man was punished for homosexual intercourse, where are the eyewitnesses that the Quran insists present their evidence before anyone is found guilty of illicit sexual intercourse? Where is the man's partner if they were discovered having intercourse by others? Why he mentions that? So in Islamic law, when it comes to zina, illicit intercourse, there has to be two situations. One, people saw them, and these people are witnesses, and they come in the course and they state it. The other one is if the people who did it go and say, we did it. Okay, but here, none of these criteria were met. Why did Ali suggested punishing them with burning rather than executing him by stoning, as would have been the case for illicit heterosexual intercourse, zina? Some versions of this report preserve the name of the punished man as Al-Fuja'a, but give no context to the event. His name provides a clue to discovering what really happened. In books of military history, we find contextual information about the event which can answer this question. It is a context that leads us to surprising conclusions. And here, I will die and I will whisper this to everyone who is around me. Nothing pertaining to anything about Islamic law, Islamic ethics, Islamic should be only examined in isolation. Context matters. Where can we find information? The Hadith and biographies and military historical books. We do have, so from the second century Hijri, which would be, let's not make mistakes, from the 8th century, onwards, Common Era. We do have history books, we do have biographies. We can find this information there. And context matters. We will see why. Let me drink some water because my throat is blocked. So, we continue. There are two major historical chronicles of the early Islamic community and its expansion into an empire, written by At-Tabari and Al-Waqidi. In Al-Tabari's history, we find that the man named Al-Fuja'a was a controversial military leader when Abu Bakr ordered the wars of apostasy. Abu Bakr organized the Muslim Arabs in Medina, Ta'if, and Mecca into an army, joined by some of the semi-nomadic tribes of the Hijaz, to attack rebel tribes. The tribes I told you earlier, that they refused to renew their allegiance with Abu Bakr. Some tribes had thrown off allegiance to Abu Bakr simply because they were proud of their independence and resented paying taxes to a nascent Islamic state. The rebellion was made more dangerous because other tribes opted to follow a local prophet who rose up to imitate and rival Muhammad. You see, I told you earlier that in the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and shortly after his death, there were other people that also claimed to be prophets. Now, I will not expound on that here. When the courses will come up, find the right course and register. Many tiny details that most Muslims don't know. And you know what? Until now, perhaps we had an excuse as Muslims not to know, but by 2025, no excuse. So I continue. The rest of the nomadic and semi-nomadic Arab tribes were divided between those openly hostile to the Muslims in Medina and those with a wait-and-see attitude who were not willing to submit to any authority easily. The incident of the act of the tribe of Lot occurred in the context of these wars against the rebel Arab tribes and therefore was against rebel Arab tribes and therefore has very political dimensions. Our first hint that it may not have been so much about homosexual intercourse as rather about a rebellion against prophetic authority. Khalid ibn al-Walid hesitated before punishing the man and wrote back from the front for explicit instructions from the Khalifa Abu Bakr. Khalid was usually a bold and rash commander, but had been reprimanded before by the Prophet. Pay attention to this part that follows. Khalid had previously been sent to fight against the Arab tribe of Al-Jadima when they resisted giving allegiance to the nascent Islamic State in Medina. So we see that some of the tribes did not want to give allegiance to the Prophet, and then the Prophet sent the army to convince them. He defeated them. So Khalid defeated the tribe. However, because of their local dialect of Arabic, they did not say we submit to become Muslim, Aslama, but rather we came out of one religion into another, Sabana. Khalid ignored this dialectical expression and kept on killing or taking captive those who did not say specifically the word Aslamna. He gave each Muslim soldier a captive and ordered each to kill his captive. However, the man who reported this incident, Ibn Omar, refused the order, saying, "By God, I shall not kill my captive, and none of my companions shall kill his captive," because he understood that these Arabs had submitted and become Muslims again by expressing surrender in their own dialect. A vivid incident of when half knowledge is worse than lack of knowledge. Ignorance can create problems. When they complained, the people, the Sahaba that refused to kill their captives, complained to the Prophet about Khalid's decision, the Prophet said, "Oh God, I am innocent of what Khalid ibn al-Walid has done," repeating these 2 more times. So the Prophet thrice said, "Oh God, I'm innocent of what he did." Owing to earlier rebukes like this against his military decisions, Khalid had become more cautious in the context of fighting Arab tribes to force them back to the Islam when they had renounced. So Khalid was cautious about punishing Fuja'a on his own initiative. If it had been a simple case of publicly witnessing homosexual intercourse that he considered illegal, there is little doubt that a rash military commander would have dispensed justice on the spot. Instead, he hesitated and sent word to Medina to ask for instructions. So we see this was not something that happened instantly. I found a man who did that. Okay, burn him alive. Well, how should I burn him alive? I'm not quite sure that this is the right decision. Among Muslim leaders, these discussions, which shows, again, there was no certainty. There was no basis on something like that. If it was in the Quran, if it was something the Prophet had done, if it was something the Prophet said in a hadith, Khalid wouldn't have hesitated, but he did. Mind you, Khalid was a very hot-blooded person. So let's see what happened from that place onwards, or that point onwards. Instead, he hesitated and sent word to Medina to ask for instructions. In At-Tabari's history, we find that Fuja'a was captured and sent back to Medina alive to face his punishment. So Khalid, the army commander, was like, "I'm not doing it. I'm sending him back to you, and do whatever you want with him." Abu Bakr ordered him to be burned in the large open field used for communal prayers at holiday festivals. And again, Kuble gives us the sources. Essentially, in the mosque, they asked for this person to be burned alive in the mosque. I was a little bit saddened when I read this part, because the mosque for me is a space for peace, for protection, for communicating with God. Burning a human alive, and God knows best. The fact that the military commander hesitated before executing justice, and that Abu Bakr personally oversaw his public punishment in the capital, is our second clue that Fuja'a's crime was not same-sex intercourse. The third clue we have about Fuja'a is his name. In Arabic, it refers to a surprise attack or sudden assault, and is related to one of the many names for a pouncing lion. I think Arabic language has approximately 40 different words for a lion. One is the attacking lion, the pouncing lion. It is a name fit for a warrior. In the history of At-Tabari, we find that he was indeed a warrior of the Arab tribe of Banu Salim. He was known by the nickname Al-Fuja'a because of the ferocity of his sudden attacks, but his given name was Iyas ibn Abdi Yalil. His tribe had nominally converted to Islam while the Prophet Muhammad was alive, but for material gain or political ambition. In their Bedouin logic, the tribe of the person we know as Fuja'a, in their Bedouin logic, they were fully justified. No, when the Prophet Muhammad died, faith had not yet fully entered their hearts, and many of them retracted their offer of submission. Islam is submission. We understand it as submission to God, but back then it meant submission to the political leader. In their Bedouin logic, they were fully justified. The Prophet was dead, so their political allegiance to him was no longer binding. But in Muslim logic, the retraction was an act of rebellion. In the view of Abu Bakr, their allegiance was to a religion, to God and God's messenger, such that even when the messenger was dead, the religious community continued and its leader commanded allegiance. In the eyes of the Muslims, the Arab tribes retracting allegiance was religious heresy and as well as political rebellion. The term apostasy combines these two dimensions. So Abu Bakr sent military expeditions against them, like that of Khalid ibn al-Walid. Under pressure of military attack, many of the tribes again agreed to become Muslims and owe allegiance to Medina. Medina being the capital at this point, okay? Because the capital moved from time to time. And Fuja'a was sent to be punished in the bigger praying space in the capital. Bear this in mind for the historical and political connotations. Having once rebelled, Fuja'a agreed to rejoin the Muslims, but he did this not from faith, but for self-advancement. Parenthesis, it's not written in the book. Whatever I'm telling you while I'm looking at the camera, it's my contribution to the discussion, not from the book. The book is whatever I read. So, why personal gain? Because yes, the tribes that were had pledged allegiance, they were paying tax, but when they were participating in wars or attacks, they were looting. Okay, they were taking, they were grabbing slaves. Slavery was absolutely okay back then. They were taking material possessions, and these spoils of war were shared among the fighters, among the soldiers as we know it today. So yes, they had to pay some taxation, but if by being Muslims could attack around and grab people and possessions, the tax that they had to pay was very small. And Fuja'a was one of the warriors, so he had personally, he would be largely benefited by being in allegiance with Muslims. He saw that the Muslim forces were in need of military reinforcements and offered to lead some of his tribe to fight on their behalf. He presented, and this is a quote here, he presented his request to Abu Bakr saying, "Support me with weapons and send me against whomever you will from among the tribe of apostasy." So he, Abu Bakr, gave him weapons and commanded him with his orders. This is a quote. Let's see which quote it is. It's quote, okay, this is from At-Tabari Tarikh, History, Volume 3, page 264. The Muslims accepted the offer of Fuja'a and armed his tribal band as a mercenary force. So you see, he was not some simple man that lived in a faraway place, peacefully, a farmer or something. He was very known, well known to the political elite of Medina. Once armed, Fuja'a lived up to his predatory nickname. He made a sudden attack upon the hand that had armed him. Instead of fighting loyally for the Muslims, he fought against whoever stood in his way. He acted as a brigand, attacking Muslims and other tribes indiscriminately in order to gather wealth and power for himself. And the source for that is, again at Tabari. And here there's a comment by the author who says it's not clear what was the ultimate aim of Al-Fuja'a to leave the piratical life of a highway robber or to set himself up as a territorial strongman, which is another thing that we need to understand. When military leaders from tribes started becoming too powerful, too feared, and too materially strong, too wealthy, they would establish themselves as political leaders in the surrounding areas. So Fuja'a's behavior, that he started killing anyone, whatever, just I'm killing you and I'm taking the spoils from you, that posed him as a threat against Muslims on political power. Okay, even as a Muslim, because that's what happened eventually. We had the Umayyads, and then we had when the rebellion of the Abbasids against the Umayyads happened. It was Muslims against Muslims. So he could, as a Muslim, start challenging the authority of Abu Bakr, Omar, whatever, and claiming authority for himself based on his power. Okay, so this, you see how the situation, how the story becomes a little bit more complex when you see the context. His crimes included apostasy twice over, murder of Muslims, and highway robbery, as he could sustain a militia in the desert wastes only by preying on trade routes. In the course of attacks, he may have perpetrated sexual assaults as well against men or women. And this is something we know. I mean, there are many studies. There is no point of arguing that in situations of political instability, in situations of revolutions, in situations of dictatorships, in situations of wars, women are being raped. Men, no, it's not. Men rape women like nothing, you know? So, could he, in this rebellious behavior, could he have sexually assaulted men or women? And we do know again that in war periods, men are also sexually assaulted. As a sexual assault is being used as a means of punishment, of ridicule, of moral destruction. Okay, so there is a chance. We don't have evidence for that, but is there a chance that perhaps he did that? Could be, yes. The history of At-Tabari does not mention sexual crimes, but in the context of his piratical lifestyle, they are quite probable. Now, does At-Tabari have reasons not to mention these? I don't know. If Fuja'a did such acts and Tabari did not mention them, that can only mean that such acts were so common, so prevalent, that people didn't even bother recording them. Which, why do I mention that? We like it or not, Fuja'a was a Muslim. So if such acts of sexual assault were so common that At-Tabari and other historians would not mention them, that says a lot about the first generation of Muslims, because Fuja'a, we like it or not, through allegiance or not, is one of the Sahaba. Okay, everyone who lived in the period of the Prophet is considered one of the Sahaba. So if sexual assault was so common by Muslims, when it was happening by Muslims, that tells us a lot about the first generation of Muslims. Otherwise, Fuja'a did not do that. That's why At-Tabari did not record it. So, I mean, choose whatever you like. The political treachery of Fuja'a was more dangerous to the Muslims than his military attacks. So the probability that he would claim authority or political leadership was much more dangerous than him attacking random people and stealing and taking slaves. He set a deadly precedent. If Fuja'a were allowed to continue, the Muslims would have a hard time controlling other Arab tribes who offered to re-ally themselves and could not trust them with arms to join in the ongoing struggle. For this reason, Khalid ibn Walid turned quickly to capture Fuja'a, sending against him a contingent of warriors led by Turaifa ibn Hajiz. This contingent captured Fuja'a and he was sent back to Medina for punishment after Khalid ibn al-Walid had written to the Khalifa Abu Bakr and that the man was guilty of doing the acts of the tribe of Lot. This is the key to the story. Fuja'a was executed for doing the acts of the tribe of Lot, but did that phrase mean homosexual intercourse? In these early days, did that phrase meant what jurists would later define as sodomy, liwat? We saw in the previous video about talking about hadith that the term liwat is a much later term that was invented by the jurists to mean what it means today. In the era of the Sahaba, this term did not exist. As we saw in chapter 2, the Quranic narrative tells of many kinds of crime perpetrated by the tribe of Lot. It is probable that in the time of Abu Bakr, so close to the era of the revelation, this phrase would be understood as an umbrella term for a whole constellation of acts that were named in the Quran. These various crimes were united in their intention, which was rebellion against the authority of the Prophet who was sent to them as a guide. We saw that in the two videos I made about approaching homosexuality through the Quran. What is the actual meaning of the deeds of the tribe of Lot? From this perspective, we can understand that why Fuja'a was accused of the acts of the tribe of Lot. It was because he had rebelled against the Prophet Muhammad's authority as delegated to his successors. In short, his major crime was apostasy and rebellion, his other kinds of assault being expression of this intent. Other evidence shows us that the early Muslim community applied burning as punishment for apostasy. You see, the punishment for illicit sexual intercourse was stoning, not burning. But for cases of apostasy in this very troubled and confusing first years after the death of the Prophet, the punishment for apostasy was burning. Al-Fuja'a was punished by burning. The decision to burn Fuja'a was made by Abu Bakr on the advice of Ali, but it was a highly contentious decision. For example, one close follower of the Prophet, Ibn Abbas, who was also a cousin of the Prophet and who has left us, or he is considered today to be the earliest Quranic exegete, apparently criticized this decision. His servant, Ikrimah, reported that Ali, this is a hadith now, Ali ordered to be burned some people who had rebelled against their former allegiance to Islam. When news of this reached Ibn Abbas, he said, I would not have burned them with fire, for the Prophet of God has said, do not punish people with God's own punishment. Instead, I would have killed them by other means, according to the Prophet's statement, those who change the religion you should kill. This statement reached Ali, who said, so Ibn Abbas' statement reached Ali, who said, woe be unto you, O son of my uncle Ibn Abbas. This is the hadith. The source of the hadith is on the notes of this book. Despite this criticism, Abu Bakr punished a man with burning in imitation of how God destroyed the tribe of Lot. But his decision caused debate and dissent among the senior companions of the Prophet. One of them, Ibn Abbas, even suggested that Ali's decision was audacious in claiming to replicate God's destructive will in human decisions that transgressed the explicit teaching of the Prophet Muhammad. For Al-Bukhari preserves a report, hadith, in which the Prophet is remembered to have said, "Burning by fire is a punishment only given by God." This suggestion caused open disagreement between the companions, even those as close as Ibn Abbas and his relative Ali. They were cousins. You see how things are becoming very complicated if you know the context, if you take all the details that usually those who offer fast food Islamic decisions and justifications, they don't give you. This chapter argues that this incident of apostasy and violent rebellion was, with the passing of time, misremembered. A man's punishment for treachery, rebellion against the Prophet's authority, highway robbery, murder, and assault that may have included rape, male on female or male on male, was remembered solely as an act of sodomy. The phrase, "the acts of tribe of Lot," which had covered a whole constellation of transgressions with an underlying motive of violent infidelity, became limited to same-sex intercourse. We can observe this happening in the textual variation of this report. Some variants give the executed man's name not as Fuja'a, but as Fuja'a, but as Fujat, which is a term describing a man or animal with the thighs wide apart. It seems that Muslims remembered his name in a distortion that sexualized his crime. So here is how we know what happened, we know the original names. But as time was passing, and many people, very few Muslims prior to the medieval era would actually read at-Tabari. The story would be passing down generations orally. So as the story was passing through next generations orally, the name slightly was distorted and the connotations of the terms of the events were also slightly distorted. So it seems that Muslims remembered his name in a distortion that sexualized his crime, projecting upon him the quality of opening widely his thighs and make himself sexually available, with the hint of being penetrated anally. His character, as preserved in historical accounts, was such that, to the contrary, he was more likely to force open the thighs of others in sexual assault than to allow himself to be penetrated. But once he was captured and executed, later generations of Muslims distorted his name, whether with deliberate derogatory intent or spontaneously in a slippage of meaning, to accuse him of homosexual intercourse. Then the book continues, gives us a lot of information about how Judaic stories and precedent and laws infiltrated the laws of Islam. It gives us how different ways that laws were created, like laws by analogy, laws as dogma, which is the Hanbali approach, law as a reasonable analysis, which is the Hanafi approach, law as a critical reassessment, which is the Zahiri approach. And then we have the jurist consensus or ijma, big issue. You know how often people say the scholars say that they refer to consensus, which is imaginary. Let me tell you from now, it's imaginary. When the courses will come up, you will see what I mean with case studies. There has been almost nothing beyond elements like zina, which is in the Quran. Okay, in anything that is not, in everything that is not mentioned explicitly in the Quran, because everyone will tell you, oh, homosexuality is being mentioned in the Quran. Well, not explicitly. So in anything other than what explicitly is mentioned in the Quran as a law or as an order, there has been no absolute consensus ever. But those who want to convince you about certain things will mention that, will throw that on your face, and you will feel like, oh, if every scholar, if every learned agreed on this matter, then that who am I to question the scholars? Well, ijma was it's one of the many mythologies we have in Islamic history, Islamic tradition, Islamic past. Anyway, I will not read more, and I will not read, I mean, this is all I will read for you for this chapter. It must be approximately 1 hour. Very important paradigm of how we should always study and search and contextualize whatever is being presented to us. This is for chapter number 4. I will make one more. There is the book has 2 more chapters. Chapter 5, reforming Sharia, and chapter 6, reviving the spirit, Islamic approaches to transgender experience, and then the conclusion. I will not read these chapters in detail for the simple reason of time. I mean, I have spent 3 months now covering this book, which is a lot. And the objective was not to read all the book. I read in detail elements that I consider very important for those of you out there that you don't really like reading books to know. The rest, it's good if you want them, get a hold of the book and read it. I believe you can find the book also online for free on PDF form. I'm not quite sure, check about that. Legally finding it in one of the research websites. Otherwise, it's a very affordable book, and it's good to have it. I will have, you see, I have covered, this is what I have covered already. This, I will not cover it for time economy. Not that it's not important. It is very important, but for you to be able to understand whether homosexuality, or how we understand homosexuality in Islam today, has any basis on Qur'an, Hadith, and precedents, I believe whatever I covered in the videos is important. It covers that aspect. The rest of the book is about how progressive Muslims today require a reformation of Sharia. And yes, before you start typing comments about, oh, Sharia is not to be reformed, is the law of God. Well, hold your horses, because it's not. But this will come in a different discussion. I will have one more video as a conclusive video. My comments, my impressions, my take on the book, and what it is important, what this book is important for. And that will be all for this book. Hopefully, by the next month, the new year, we will start with the second most voted book by you for me to read. Now, if you have any books that, again, I think it's a little bit, if you go to my Instagram, if you go on my Instagram account, you will see the books, you will see the polls I had. They are still active. You can go and you can vote for the book that you want. That is all for today. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your patience. And may God be with you, and may God guide you to the best action ever. Have a lovely day.